The so-called glam yoga teacher is in court. The trial of Kaitlin Armstrong starting now, and I mean right now.
You heard the lady, like right meow. Let's get into it.
Glam yoga teacher.
Kaitlin Armstrong, 35, is charged with first-degree murder in the May 11th, 2022 shooting death of Anna Mariah Mo Wilson, who was 25. Armstrong was allegedly furious that her boyfriend, professional cyclist Colin Strickland, had secretly gone out on a date with Wilson. A 43-day manhunt for Armstrong ensued when she skipped town after being questioned and released by police about why her 2012 Jeep Grand Cherokee was caught on surveillance video near the scene of the murder. Police didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest, but Armstrong proceeded to sell her vehicle and hop on a plane. She went from Austin to Houston to New York and eventually landed in Costa Rica. Armstrong was captured in Costa Rica in July of 2022. She had apparently undergone plastic surgery and dyed her hair. She was laying low at a hostel and had been using her sister's passport. Armstrong was extradited to the U.S., where she pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. Bail was set at $3.5 million, and she has remained in custody ever since. This is the trial of Texas versus Kaitlin Marie Armstrong.
The former boyfriend of Kaitlin Armstrong, Colin Strickland, was first called to the stand Friday. Because he knew both the suspect and the victim, Anna Mariah Mo Wilson, his lengthy testimony went well into Monday, with both the prosecution and defense asking him about his relationships with both women. During a break.
Welcome to day 4 of the Kaitlin Armstrong cyclist love triangle murder trial. Today's updates are coming from The Independent UK and Jessica Taylor on X. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is day number 4 of the Kaitlin Armstrong trial, and we begin court on Monday morning with Colin Strickland taking the stand again. The day begins by the state asking some follow-up questions about the race in Bentonville that was previously mentioned. The state asked if Strickland remembers a text exchange after that event with Wilson, where she asked about their relationship status. Strickland says he does not recall those details. The state asked the preferred method of moving a bicycle. Strickland says to ride it is preferred. He's describing another way if riding isn't possible, essentially grabbing the seat area, and handles. Strickland's demeanor is relatively similar to Friday. He's keeping his eyes down and speaking low, though clearer than on Friday. The state then asked if Strickland reviewed a document of blocked contacts from his cell phone. They asked if he recognized any contacts that were blocked, that he didn't block himself. He responded yes, and there were approximately 4. One was Mariah Wilson. The other 3 were different women. Now we get into the text messages. January 6th, 2022. Potential exchange between Strickland and Wilson. Strickland says he doesn't recognize the from number, but says it appears to be sent to Strickland and Wilson. Hey, did something? But says it appears to be sent to Strickland from Wilson. Quote, hey, just did something to my phone. Checking to see if this message goes through. Another message. Wait, did you get that? Seemingly from Wilson. Strickland says he had never blocked Wilson's contact. I got it. Response from Strickland, shown in the photos of the texts. Seeing photos of a few other exchanges shown of Wilson and Strickland, seeing if their texts were going through. April 11th, 2022. You make it to Santa Rosa? From Wilson. Strickland says he was traveling to his sister's house in Santa Rosa at the time. Another exchange seemingly shows Wilson asking a racing question to Strickland. The state referred to those messages as friendly communication. May 10th, 2022. Messages from Wilson. Hey, are you back in Austin? I'm flying there today to hang out with Cash for a few days before Gravel Locos. Strickland appears to tell Wilson hello and that he arrived the night prior to Austin. Communication appears to continue May 10th. Wilson and Strickland discuss possibly getting together for a training ride on the 11th. In the messages, Strickland says he rolled out for a bike ride with his other friend, and he never heard from Wilson. Wilson replies that she texted him back. Now seeing messages about going swimming that day, May 11th, we see a photo attachment that appears to show Mo biking. The message accompanying the bicycling photo was, "Sounds great. I'm dying out here." Strickland says he proposed picking her up on his motorcycle and going to Deep Eddy Pool. State asks if she was interested in that. Strickland responds, correct. Strickland and Wilson finalize plans approximately 4:45 p.m. At 4:49, Strickland receives a text with the address that Wilson was staying. The address is Kaitlin Cash's residence. At 5:43 p.m., Strickland appears to have texted about the traffic. Different photos of messages are displayed, but contact name displays Christine Wall. Strickland testified that is not an actual person he knows, but he used the name in his phone for Wilson. The messages with Christine Wall appear to be the same contents as the ones with Mo Wilson. Seeing messages between Kaitlin Armstrong and Strickland now, June 27th, 2021. Strickland says the whole convo is about investing. Strickland sighs. October 28th, 2021. Message seemingly from Armstrong to Strickland. I know you better than to show up at Meteor with that girl. Strickland says that girl is referencing Wilson. The follow-up message from Strickland to Armstrong reads, Can you please be an adult? Another message from Strickland says that Wilson was meeting with friends there, but he was not going because he respects Armstrong. Strickland says he was not in a relationship with Armstrong at the time. So what this is referencing is after a race, there was a night out kind of thing or something, and Colin didn't go because Kaitlin and Mo were going to be at the event together. Not together, but they were both going to be there, so Colin didn't go. So he avoided the situation. And that was when Kaitlin, she sent that text, I know you know better than to show up at Meteor with that girl. So that must be where they all went after this race. And she was warning him, like, hey, I know you're not going to show up here with her, because they were in a group photo that day together, Mo and Colin. At 8:05 p.m. that same night, Strickland texts Armstrong. Did you call Mo? What the fuck? Strickland sent a follow-up text saying he needs to understand what's going on. He testified that Armstrong's behavior seemed erratic. In January of 2022, a conversation between Strickland and Armstrong about the firearms that were previously purchased. A photo is pulled up that's a receipt for 2 firearms from McBride's. It's dated December 6, 2021. Strickland says he wanted to exchange his firearm, which is why he needed the receipt. On January 12th, 2022, a text message that contains a video. The video shows a woman from the back at a firing range of some kind. Cannot see the person's face, but Strickland says he believes it's Armstrong. Seeing more messages now between Armstrong and Strickland. March 12th, 2022. Inquiring about how a race went. which Strickland says was not a good race for him. 11:30 p.m. text from Armstrong. Send my love to Pete and Mo. Strickland responds, can you please stop? Strickland previously said he posted a video on Instagram with 10 to 20 other riders, which Wilson was in. He reiterated he found the message from Armstrong. Passive aggressive. May 11th, 2022. Discussion filing an official complaint with Texas Real Estate Commission. There was a real estate dispute happening with a third party, Strickland says. Text from Armstrong at 6:25 and 7:17 went unanswered by Strickland. Strickland responds around 8:30 after dropping Wilson off, he says. He asks if Armstrong is home at 8:43. She doesn't respond. May 12th. Messages with Strickland and a friend named Lance, who was going to buy some bicycle wheels. Strickland says he saw Lance briefly as he was leaving to go to the police station. The last message is 6:52 p.m., May 13th. Message with Strickland and Armstrong. He says that he did not know where Armstrong was then. Now it's time for cross-examination. When the court took a recess, Colin decided to show his true colors yet again, like he did last Friday. Yeah, watch this. He literally shoves the cameraman's camera almost out of his hands. What a prize, what a prize. As I mentioned in a previous video, this dude's pressing charges against Colin. He has a second encounter. You're going to see in a little bit. All right, recess is over. Back to our testimony. Okay, so like I said, the defense is up cross-examining Colin Strickland. Defense attorney Rick Kofer asking Strickland if he spoke with someone about his testimony over the weekend. Kofer asking who he spoke with specifically. Strickland responds, I have no fucking idea. Defense now asking about a racing championship and Armstrong's demeanor. I missed which event. Oh, don't say that. Strickland says that he recalls Armstrong and Wilson in the same restaurant at one point. Says he did not see them interact at that restaurant. Defense. On May 11th, you asked a former employee to move vehicles you owned, correct? Strickland. I don't recall that. Defense. Do you recall generally where you'd keep your keys in your home? Strickland says, in a bowl. Defense says that's the same spot Armstrong kept her Jeep key. Defense is having Strickland list how many vehicles he owned or used. Defense asked if he previously owned a black SUV. Strickland says he got rid of it in 2020. Defense asked if his black SUV had the same bike rack as Armstrong's. Says it's transferred around, but acknowledges that briefly his black SUV had a bike rack at some point while in the relationship with Armstrong. Defense asks if anyone else ever drove her Jeep, like her sister. He essentially says it's possible, but has no idea. Defense is asking about passwords now. Strickland says his phone and iPad very likely had the same numeric passcode. Defense. Do you claim that you would receive some messages from Mariah Wilson, but not at all? Wait. Defense. Do you claim that you would receive some messages from Mariah Wilson, but not all? Strickland. I don't recall. Similar questioning follows. Strickland says he eventually determined her contact had been blocked, and he unblocked her. Defense asking about why Strickland didn't tell police about the suspected blocking back in May of 2022. Defense asks, why is the first time you're ever saying it here on the witness stand? You got me, Strickland says sarcastically. Wow. Defense asks if the spreadsheet he reviewed with the DA showed 71 blocked contacts, but Strickland says he can't recall the number, though he acknowledges it was somewhere in that ballpark. Defense poses questions about the content of the messages between Strickland and Wilson, of all their messages. Defense: would the content of those messages upset Kaitlin? Strickland: I can't speak to that. The defense asks if Strickland ever got messages from Wilson or other people and then acted like he hadn't received them. Defense brings up the Colorado woman and the photo mentioned Friday, then asks Strickland if he has heard of sexting. Strickland says no, he's never heard it defined, and it sounds ridiculous. After Kofer asks more questions about the Colorado woman, Strickland responds, "How is this relevant?" The courtroom chuckles. Kofer says he appreciates the question and responds that this is the time for the defense and state to ask their questions. Defense: do you recall telling investigators you don't believe Kaitlin had gone through your phone before October of 21? Strickland says he does not recall. Defense asks if there's any hard proof Armstrong ever got in his phone. Any evidence? Strickland says he's not a detective. Strickland is holding his head with his left hand, located right by his eyebrow, covering half his face. Defense is asking about a dish where the car keys are kept, asking about a jar of marijuana and mushrooms. Strickland says the marijuana was his, the mushrooms were Armstrong's. Defense asks how many doors to the home. Strickland then asks to define a door, but says there are 5. Security code to access the home. Defense asks if he's aware he gave out the code 33 times. He says it's possible. Defense is bringing up texts with Strickland and an apparent friend. Other text threads being brought up into evidence. It's between Strickland and his friends. And this is a direct tweet from Jessica Taylor, who is in the courtroom. And she states, "I have not seen eye contact between Strickland and Armstrong, and Strickland has his hand covering his face on the side closest to where Armstrong is seated. His body angled away from her. I don't have a good view of Armstrong to see where she's looking." Isn't that funny, though? He's like a child. He has his hand up so he can't see her. This guy. The defense asks if Strickland shares the code. So they're showing more text messages, and the defense asks Colin if those are all instances in which he shares his code to his front door. Strickland says, correct. Strickland says it was common for people to come to his house, and occasionally those he was selling bike parts to. Also common, he says, for people to come when they weren't home. Going to the bike ride now from May 11th, 2022. Asked if Armstrong was home when Strickland arrived, which he believes so, but can't recall. The defense is now asking about his Friday testimony. He testified that he drove to pick up Wilson in the Cherrywood neighborhood. Says he's not personally familiar with the boundaries of Cherrywood. Defense asks if he's aware that Cash's apartment is actually in the Chestnut neighborhood. Asking about the motorcycle ride. Defense: were Mariah Wilson's arms around you on the motorcycle ride? Strickland says it's possible that Wilson's hands were on his hips for stability. Asks if it's... The defense then asked if it's the same seat Armstrong sat on, which Strickland says is correct. Strickland believes he put on a jacket after leaving Cash's apartment, but isn't sure. It would have been a safety thing, not a temperature thing. Strickland says it's conceivable Wilson's DNA could be on that jacket. Strickland says he was not intimate with Wilson on May 11th, 2022. The defense then asked if on a phone call from October 28th with Kofer, defense asked if on a phone call from October 28th with Kofer, whether Strickland said he's actively trying to forget the events of May 11th. Strickland says that sounds accurate, yes. Then the defense says, you know Armstrong very well, don't you? Strickland replies, no, I don't. Defense asks how Armstrong would have responded if Strickland had answered her messages from May 11th, and he said he was getting a bite to eat with Wilson. Defense asked how Kaitlin would have responded if Colin had answered her message from May. Oh my God. Defense asked how Armstrong would have responded if Strickland. Defense asked how Armstrong would have responded if Strickland had answered her messages from May 11th and said he was getting a bite to eat with Wilson. Strickland says he can't say. Defense, you texted Armstrong at 9:21 p.m. on May 11th, correct? Strickland says he doesn't remember, and defense presses back. These messages were previously displayed in court. On what basis would you characterize yourself as perceptive? Defense asks. Strickland says visually. He says nothing seemed out of the norm. He says nothing seemed out of the normal with Armstrong the night Wilson died, May 12th being brought up. Kofer asks if Strickland spoke with Armstrong after the police showed up that morning. He says yes. Strickland agrees he separated himself from Armstrong after getting an attorney. The defense asks if it was May 13th. Strickland says he can't recall the date. The defense then asks, you asked Detective Spitler if Wilson's bike had been stolen, correct? Strickland says correct, and that no one prompted him to ask, and no one spoke about the bike before that. So how would he know it was stolen? Defense is bringing up alleged vandalism. There were stone pavers flipped up, a dent in a car. Strickland believed it happened 24 hours or so after Wilson. What? The defense is bringing up alleged vandalism. There were stone pavers flipped up, a dent in a car. Strickland believes it happened 24 hours or so after Wilson's death. Defense asks if he took photos. Strickland says yes, now questioning about whether Austin PD investigated it. Strickland says he never got an answer to who committed vandalism and had no previous issues of vandalism at his home. After second interview with police, Strickland says he felt like the detectives were leading a narrative and manipulating him. The defense is asking about his characterization of his relationship with Armstrong as tumultuous. Kofer reads dictionary definition of tumultuous. Strickland says no assault, property damage, screaming, abuse ever occurred in the relationship. Strickland says his internal view of the relationship was tumultuous. Says Armstrong's fast fashion was a part of the reason he didn't think the relationship would be a long term. Defense asks if that's fair to say more of a you issue than a Kaitlin issue. Strickland agrees. Fast fashion? What does that even mean? If anybody knows what fast fashion means, leave it in the comment section. Defense then asks if Strickland knew Armstrong very well. I thought so, yes, said Strickland. Strickland agreed with the defense question that he wanted Armstrong to manage his finances and he wasn't tricked into it. Strickland believes he was 35 when he had his fling with Wilson, 25 at the time. Defense asks if it's common for him to have intercourse with the young women he mentors. Strickland says he doesn't know what the defense is asking. Discussing Armstrong's travel now. Defense says she traveled to Iceland, Mexico, and other locations. For the most part, Strickland agrees and says it was for yoga mainly. Strickland confirms he was in a relationship with Armstrong October 2019 to March 2020, and a brief break prior to the pandemic. Says he can't recall if he was sexting, dating, talking to other people in that time. Says he didn't believe they had enough in common as breakup reason. Defense says they want to discuss their relationship from March 2020 to October 2021. Asks if he can focus on that. I would love to, Strickland responds, seemingly with sarcasm. Strickland says they broke up for a 5-week period, in which time Armstrong dated other people, and he had a fling with Wilson. Armstrong's belongings were in Strickland's home at the time of Strickland and Wilson fling. Questions about the changed contact name for Wilson. Strickland agrees that he told detectives at the time that changing the name, he deemed the path of least resistance. Strickland says, apparently not, when asked if he does not like emotional conversations. Strickland says he believes Armstrong had a problem with Wilson. Strickland says he viewed Armstrong as a calm and mild person at one time. Defense is bringing up a third party who allegedly warned Wilson not to get involved with Strickland. Strickland says he didn't know about that. Defense is going through names of other women Strickland seemingly dated or knew. In one instance, a group chat is referenced between Strickland, an ex-girlfriend, and Armstrong. Defense asks if Armstrong displayed jealousy. Strickland says he can't recall. Strickland agrees he lied to Armstrong on May 11th about his plans' whereabouts. Defense asked if it was because he didn't want to get caught. Strickland says he didn't have a heavy, guilty conscience and maintains he thought Armstrong had a problem with Wilson. Defense bringing up Strickland's previous statements. Quote, it was your opinion Kaitlin had never been violent, correct? Correct, Strickland replies. You told police Armstrong was one of the least volatile women you've dated in terms of emotion, correct? Strickland agreed. Defense pointing out Strickland allegedly had relations with others while with Armstrong, and they are all, quote, fine today. Strickland is angling his body away from Armstrong, rubbing his hand along his forehead by his temple. Strickland agrees purchasing the guns was his idea. Strickland asked if, to his knowledge, he had ever seen Armstrong clean a gun, or if he had a gun cleaning kit. Strickland says no to both. The defense is preparing to present physical evidence. Cover is putting on gloves. Strickland identifies the pistol brought in with a paper bag. He identifies it as the handgun he bought previously. Strickland identifies a magazine for the pistol previously shown to the jury. Strickland also identified a lock, which was previously on one of the two guns. Strickland identifies another magazine and a case for a handgun. Strickland identifies the defendant's pistol. He says he paid for it. Strickland agrees that the pistol was in his house. The defense asks Strickland to stand up and show the jury how the cable lock operates. He does so and starts to walk away. Defense asks another question, which... Cut that part out. Defense passes witness. Lunch break begins now. The state returns with more questions from Strickland. Previously, the defense pursued a line of questioning surrounding whether other people had access to Strickland's home or Armstrong's car. State asks if these people knew Wilson. Strickland says no. The state is asking about 71 blocked contacts. They ask if majority are spam. Strickland says it's possible. State circles back to recognizing 4 women's names in his blocked list and whether he blocked them. Strickland says he did not. State goes back to the people who had the code for Strickland's door. State asks if he had a reason to believe they knew Wilson or where she was staying. He says no. Strickland testified that Armstrong had her own motorcycle helmet. State asks if vast majority of the time who wore Strickland's helmet. He said himself. Strickland doesn't believe Armstrong could ride the motorcycle without him, given it weighs approximately 600 pounds. He was asked if Armstrong was on his motorcycle at all on May 11th, to the dentist, to pick up Wilson. He says no. State, just to be clear, I thought you said today you believe the defendant had a problem with Mo Wilson. Strickland, loose definition, yes. State asking if Strickland recalls the demeanor of Wilson after receiving a phone call, which was previously alleged in testimony as coming from Armstrong. Strickland says he believes that Wilson found it strange. Strickland asked what he was told detectives about changing Wilson's contact to Christine Wall. He says he felt the right to maintain a friendship with an ex-girlfriend of sorts without constant strife, in quotes. State trying to clarify what was actually told to police. Strickland reading what I believe is a transcription of sorts from a detective interview. He now says he told detectives he believed Armstrong had looked in his phone in the past, which has been, quote, a source of fights. Strickland believes he told police Wilson had one of the most valuable gravel bicycles, Strickland believes he told police that Mo Wilson had one of the most valuable gravel bicycles, but understated in appearance and difficult for general public to determine the value. State has Strickland review what he said when police told him Armstrong's car was seen at the complex. Strickland testified, he said, quote, I don't know how to respond to that. That is intense information. Witness 23. Detective Richard Spitler takes the stand. Spitler is discussing his experience over the last 8 years with APD. He says he's been lead detective in 125 aggravated assault cases. Spitler says an aggravated is anything where a weapon is used during an assault, knife, gun, etc., or an assault that causes bodily injury. He says he's seen firearms, knives, baseball bats. He says biggest difference with homicide is that in aggravated assault, they can speak with the victim. State asks if this was Detective Spitler's first homicide. He says yes. Spitler is the primary detective on the case. Detective Price was the secondary detective. Spitler explains reasons why it's good to have two detectives. Spitler says it's important to make contact with witnesses because they were the ones there and can give background. Spitler says after Cash was released, he responded to scene. He reviews his report to jog his memory and says he responded to the scene early hours on May 12th. Detective Price was at the scene first and briefed Spitler. Price showed him things that stood out. They followed red stains, which ended up not being blood. This has been mentioned before by other law enforcement in court. Spitler says the apartment didn't look as if anything was out of place. He saw a laptop and a cell phone on the couch by the door. Tables, chairs, and items not knocked over, he says. Mentioned a small green cabinet partially opened and a candy bar around that area. Spitler saw markers on the ground that indicated where spent cartridges were. Spitler did not assist in looking for cameras around the neighborhood that night, but remembers seeing ring footage. He describes the black SUV picked up by cameras. Spitler says he was the first to make contact with Colin Strickland, along with Ayers. We've previously seen video footage of this interaction played in court. Spitler says he attempted to call Strickland early in the morning, but he didn't answer. He did not leave a voicemail and went to Strickland's house. He explains that he wanted to make it more of a death notification because he did not know Strickland's involvement. Spitler says 3 different vehicles he observed in the driveway at Strickland's house, one being a black Jeep with chrome around the windows and a bike rack. Spitler says it appeared to match the description of the vehicle in the area. Spitler says he recalls introducing himself and telling him Wilson passed away. He asked first if he knew someone named Anna. Strickland says no. He switched to Mo and described bicycles, and then he says Strickland recognized. He said Strickland appeared surprised. State asks about Spitler requesting Strickland to come to the headquarters. Spitler says that if anything fell off, he would ask Strickland to come to headquarters. Spitler says Strickland was not under arrest. The video of that interview is 6.5 hours. Spitler says some breaks and lags in there as well. Spitler says at that point, Strickland was a person of interest. Spitler says his impression of Strickland was very calm, cooperative, willing to help. Spitler says he was not able to find out who was driving the vehicle, the black Jeep, that night, May 11th, but found out who owned it. Spitler says he was able to find out information on relationships with Wilson, Strickland, and Armstrong. Spitler says during course of interview with Strickland, he determined he needed to speak with Armstrong. He says he conveyed that information to other officers, tactical intel unit during breaks. Spitler says based off the information from the interview, video of the vehicle that appeared to match the vehicle in the driveway, 2 guns inside the residence, Strickland being the last to see Wilson alive, he knew a search warrant was needed. Spitler used the word jealousy, which the state is asking about. Defense essentially tried to object for hearsay coming in the next sentence, but the judge did not allow that. Prosecution and defense have approached the judge. The prosecution continues their questioning. State asks a question about a whiteboard posted in the headquarters where general information is posted about cases and who is working them. The prosecution asks, did Armstrong's identifying info get added to that? Spitler says yes. Spitler says when they ran Armstrong's name, they found a warrant for a Class B misdemeanor. Spitler says she was at her residence when they served the warrant, but he was not present. Spitler says it was during that 6.5-hour interview with Strickland. Spitler says he did not speak with Armstrong that day, but Detective Katie Connor did. Spitler says police drove Armstrong back home, and Spitler was not there for that. Spitler says when he came back to work the following day on May 13th, he continued on the case. He was updated about the search warrant. Spitler says there were 2 firearms seized, which he says was important because they could possibly be the murder weapon. Spitler recalls notifying the family of Wilson's death. Spitler says he asked if there was anyone they knew who would want to hurt Wilson. They also asked about passcodes for the phone. He later submitted a search warrant for Strickland's phone. Spitler says he was able to get additional video footage. A different officer noted there were cameras at a nearby house. On May 14th, Spitler says this is the day the Austin Police Department was about to make this public with a press release. Spitler says there was more valuable information to be conducted in the neighborhood. He canvassed on May 15th. I believe Spitler said he also asked neighbors to post about it in the app Nextdoor. That they were looking for video. Spitler said he followed up with 8 residences with cameras. Some provided video, some did not. Spitler says it's because some of the cameras did not activate or weren't working. Spitler says they also received calls from anonymous callers. Spitler says Wilson's last message was at 9:13. This is weird. Spitler said Wilson's last message was at 9:13, and it was a message to Christopher Strickland. Spitler says there's no relation to Colin Strickland, and the last names are spelled differently. I cannot find the correct spelling at this moment. Timeline is up to May 17th. Second interview with Strickland. Spitler says that the ballistics report came in, and the spent cartridges matched a gun found inside Strickland and Armstrong's residence. State asked what Spitler did after getting the ballistics report and comparing it with other information. Spitler says at that point, he felt there was probable cause for a warrant of arrest for Armstrong. Spitler was speaking on the Strava app. He said it's a very popular location tracking tool in the cycling community. Spitler says Strava also stores when one user looked at another's profile or looked at another's specific route. Spitler confirms he acquired Strava details from Wilson. Her training ride, May 11th, included. Spitler discussing CarMax situation. They're talking about Armstrong's car. Spitler says it appeared the vehicle had a screen system to connect to Bluetooth and GPS. Lone Star Fugitive Task Force brought up by prosecution. State started a discussion on Armstrong's personal property in a bag recovered from Costa Rica. Defense asked to approach. Court is stopping for the day. Court will resume at 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. There is no court tomorrow due to election holiday. Wow, that was a full day of testimony. So without further ado, we're going to see Mr. Colin again leaving court. He pulls his shenanigans. Colin Strickland, why you always on some bullshit? Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you in the next Day 5 update.